By 1960, America's most cherished concert venue stood on the brink of demolition, ordered by its own municipal authorities. Carnegie Hall, the stage for legendary performers over 7 decades, famed for its unmatched acoustics, achieved via techniques that remain something of a mystery and a beacon that had lifted U.S. arts to new heights, seemed doomed to the swing of a builder's bulldozer. The transaction had gone through. Plans for the new high-rise were finalized. The teardown schedule was locked in. New York City geared up to erase a treasure it could never recreate. That's when Isaac Stern rallied a resistance. Artists, orchestra leaders, and everyday people who grasped the peril at hand launched an effort that would transform the nation's approach to safeguarding its artistic legacy. This tale chronicles Carnegie Hall's narrow escape and the 11th-hour effort that preserved an invaluable gem. Andrew Carnegie entered the world in November 1835 in Dunfermline, Scotland, inside a single-room weaver's home shared with his whole family for living and labor. His father, William, ran a manual loom in the main space, crafting fine damask linen for affluent buyers. His mother, Margaret, repaired footwear to boost the family's earnings. The Carnegies scraped by, yet William's expertise offered a basic stability. That changed with the advent of the power loom in Scotland. In just a handful of years, automation obliterated the manual weaving industry. William Carnegie lost his livelihood and any hope of steady work as his household edged toward poverty. In 1848, at age 12, Andrew joined the wave of Europeans fleeing hardship by choosing to move to the United States. The family scraped together funds for the voyage and set off for New York, before heading further to Allegheny, Pennsylvania, where Margaret's siblings had already put down roots. They landed with scarcely any possessions. Andrew's initial American employment came at a cotton factory, where he toiled as a bobbin boy for 12 hours daily, 6 days weekly, pulling in $1.20 each week. He was just 13. The labor was grueling and monotonous, yet Andrew harbored a fierce drive that would mark his future, a hunger verging on frenzy. Evenings found him studying double-entry accounting on his own. He committed to memory the visages and titles of Pittsburgh's top industrialists. Spotting an opening as a telegraph delivery boy, he jumped at it and secured the role at $2.50 weekly. The telegraph hub proved transformative. As a youth, Carnegie ferried dispatches to rail bosses, financial chiefs, and steel producers. He ensured his value by showing up ahead of time and lingering after hours. During operators' pauses, he practiced decoding the Morse code taps into readable text. In under 12 months, he ranked among Pittsburgh's swiftest operators. In 1853, Thomas Scott, who oversaw the Pennsylvania Railroad's Western Division, brought Carnegie on board as his private assistant and wire specialist. The pay reached $35 monthly, a windfall after the mill wages. Even more vital, Scott mentored him, revealing the mechanics of finance, the growth of stakes, and how forward-thinking individuals could turn small funds into vast riches. Scott urged Carnegie's debut investment in 1856. 10 shares in Adams Express Company costing $500, funded by a loan from a nearby lender. Upon receiving the initial payout, Carnegie gazed at the check in awe. Earnings from mere ownership, free of toil. This idea upended his view of wealth creation. Soon, he poured money into petroleum, metals, transport lines, and span firms. He stuck with the Pennsylvania Railroad into the Civil War era, handling troop movements for the North. But his growing portfolio pulled more of his focus. At 29, in 1865, he left the railway to devote himself fully to his enterprises. That year's returns from his stakes topped $50,000. Steel fueled his rise. Carnegie foresaw that the country's manufacturing boom demanded massive supplies of iron and steel for tracks, structures, spans, and equipment. He acquired forges, erected smelters, and streamlined the process from ore to end goods. Through full-scale control and cutting-edge methods, he slashed expenses without mercy. By the 1880s, Carnegie Steel dominated as the top and most lucrative steel outfit in the nation. Yet, Carnegie set himself apart from fellow moguls. Unlike Rockefeller or Morgan, who chased riches with unrelenting zeal, he formed an unusual creed on riches that guided his later years. He held that perishing with a hoard was a mark of shame. In 1889, his piece, Zero, appeared in the North American Review. For the era, its thesis was bold. The affluent, he posited, served only as custodians of their assets, stewarding them briefly to serve society's greater good. The piece catapulted Carnegie to prominence outside the world of commerce. This essay also drew sharp criticism, as detractors highlighted the stark gap between Carnegie's ideals and his corporate tactics. His Carnegie Steel empire relentlessly demolished rivals, clashed violently with labor unions, and squeezed maximum gains from employees and vendors alike. The very figure advocating for societal duty presided over one of the nation's most cutthroat operations. The inconsistency clearly weighed on Carnegie. Even as he aggressively amassed his riches, he started giving them away. Public libraries emerged as his hallmark initiative. From 1883 through 1929, his funds supported the erection of 2,509 such facilities throughout the English-speaking regions. Music ranked among his more obscure enthusiasms. He struggled to decipher sheet music and lacked any structured education in the art. Yet he revered top virtuosos with the zeal of a newfound devotee. Whenever his schedule permitted, he soaked up live performances, journeyed across the Atlantic just to catch iconic artists, and lamented the absence of suitable stages in the U.S. for global talents. During the 1880s, New York had no dedicated space for its symphonic ensembles. The Metropolitan Opera House, which debuted in 1883, catered solely to vocal works. The Academy of Music at 14th Street fell short in size and sound quality. Touring groups and instrumentalists made do with borrowed venues like auditoriums, playhouses, and sanctuaries, none optimized for orchestral repertoires. For a metropolis that viewed itself as the nation's artistic hub, the shortfall was mortifying. The notion of erecting a premier music venue likely crystallized in discussions involving Carnegie and Walter Damrosch, the director of the New York Symphony Society. Damrosch had long campaigned for an adequate space. Carnegie weighed his words, crunched the numbers, and reached a choice that stunned his inner circle. He committed to bankrolling a performance center that would outshine all American counterparts and match Europe's elite. The reveal happened in 1887. Carnegie pledged his own resources for a music hall at the corner of 57th Street and 7th Avenue. The spot sparked instant doubt. Back then, upscale Manhattan tapered off near 42nd Street. The zone around 57th remained mostly vacant, dismissed as too remote for prestigious arts endeavors. Pundits forecasted flop, arguing crowds simply wouldn't venture that distant. Carnegie brushed off the naysayers. His rail ventures had taught him that districts trailed development. Subway lines were pushing upward. Central Park's triumph had elevated the Upper East Side's appeal. The Upper West would catch on soon enough. He envisioned not the 1887 landscape, but the thriving New York of 1900 and later. For the designer, Carnegie picked an unexpected talent, William Burnett Tuthill, an obscure architect with experience in residences and ecclesiastical structures, but no feats of this magnitude. Tuthill's edge lay in his fixation on sound dynamics. He had toured European auditoriums, gauged their sizes, scrutinized their fabrics, and formulated ideas on audio propagation within confined areas. Carnegie prioritized sonic excellence over visual splendor. Tuthill vowed to achieve it. Work kicked off in 1889. The edifice adopted an Italian Renaissance aesthetic, pared down without lavish flourishes. Utility trumped aesthetics. Each choice advanced auditory ideals. The plot spanned 150 feet along 57th Street and 200 feet along 7th Avenue. Tut Hill centered the layout on a primary theater, holding about 2,800 patrons, with a modest concert room and assorted intimate spaces on the levels above. The principle of our auditorium specs received meticulous scrutiny. Drawing from his overseas studies, Tut Hill determined that per specific ratios yielded optimal acoustics. He crafted a rectangular form, around 150 feet in length, 115 feet across, and 60 feet tall at peak. No walls ran exactly parallel. He slanted them subtly to avoid straight rebounds of sound, averting blank zones and reverberations. The roof arched softly rather than lying level, crafted to scatter audio uniformly across the room. All coatings used a bespoke plaster blend that Tut Hill deemed perfect for modulating vibrations. The platform, modest in depth compared to today's, suited ensembles of 80 to 100 players. At the rear, Tut Hill fitted enormous movable panels that unveiled extra chairs in the dress circle area. This clever element would shine during the debut festivities, when ticket hunger far outstripped forecasts. Tut Hill obsessed over substances too. Wall and overhead plaster incorporated lime, sand, and horsehair in a recipe he devised personally. The ratios stayed under strict secrecy. Laborers spread the plaster across several slim layers instead of one heavy application, yielding a finish that was both sturdy and mildly permeable. Tut Hill was convinced this blend would enable the venue to resonate acoustically. Beneath the wooden flooring lay a subfloor cavity maintaining an air pocket under the seating area. Such a design stopped sound waves from seeping into the ground underneath. Upholstery on the chairs used a specific material picked for its sound-reflecting qualities, rigid enough to bounce back some audio when people sat down, yet yielding sufficient to prevent sharp reverberations when unoccupied. Trim expenses. Tut Hill turned them down if they were not worth the effort. Trim expenses. Tut Hill turned them down if they risked the sound quality. Carnegie backed his designer's decisions fully. He aimed for a lasting legacy, not short-term gains. They settled on the straightforward title of Music Hall, but the press quickly dubbed it Carnegie Music Hall or simply Carnegie Hall. Officially, it operated under the Music Hall Company of New York. Carnegie owned most of the stock, yet he set it up more as a commercial enterprise than outright charity. His hope was that it would earn enough to handle day-to-day expenses, if not fully recoup his outlay. By the start of 1891, the building stood finished. Tut Hill had engineered a breakthrough in U.S. design. Still, the validity of his sound principles was unproven. No full ensemble or crowd had yet filled the space. All relied on estimates and planning, right up to the debut. For that vital premiere, Carnegie sought the era's top musical talent. He selected Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. At age 50, in 1891, Tchaikovsky reigned at the peak of his renown and artistry. His symphonies and ballets had enthralled crowds across Europe. He ranked among the world's premier composers, though he'd never set foot in the United States. Travel unsettled him, he battled melancholy and nerves, and he shied away from spotlight moments, except when leading his own pieces. In early 1890, Carnegie's representatives made contact with a lavish proposal. Tchaikovsky would earn $2,500 for leading 5 performances in New York as part of the hall's inaugural celebrations, with all travel costs covered for him and his group. Adjusted for inflation, that payment tops $75,000 now. The deal was tailored to ease any hesitations. Tchaikovsky agreed, despite his personal correspondence showing profound unease over the trip. He departed from France by ship in late April 1891, docking in New York on the 27th. The metropolis stunned him. He saw locals as bold and draining, their urban clamor excessive, their rhythm overwhelming. Yet he appreciated their sincere passion for highbrow music. The gala kicked off on May 5, 1891. The lineup spotlighted Tchaikovsky's creations, featuring the U.S. debut of his March a Slave, composed expressly for the event. The New York Symphony Society and the Oratorio Society of New York mustered around 300 musicians. Seats vanished from availability almost instantly after going on sale. The occasion gripped the wider public, far beyond typical classical followers. This marked a milestone, America staking its claim in global arts. The city's elite dressed up and ventured to the far uptown spot to experience it. The day prior to the premiere, Tchaikovsky joined the last practice session. Musicians gathered on the Virgin platform. Toothill observed anxiously from the back. As the initial tones rang out, reports say he halted directing and just absorbed the music. The sonic excellence Toothill had theorized, quantified, and constructed proved true. Tones emerged crisp, rich, and even. Each voice stood out clearly while merging seamlessly into the ensemble. Whisper-soft sections reached the back rows unaided. Thunderous peaks delivered force without edge. The space delivered flawlessly. That night of May 5, 1891, roughly 2,800 attendees packed the house. Carnegie occupied a balcony seat alongside his recent bride, Louise Whitfield, wed the year before. Walter Damrosch, whose efforts had sparked the whole endeavor. The artist acknowledged them, faced his. The artist acknowledged them, faced his players, and lifted his conductor's stick. The evening's selections encompassed his March a Slave, the Coronation March from the Maid of Orleans, and excerpts from the Nutcracker, still awaiting its Russian debut. Accounts from the time portray the crowd's response as rapturous. The venue's sound surpassed even the boldest forecasts. Skeptics who had mocked the site's remoteness now lauded Carnegie's foresight. Doubters found themselves completely mistaken in all respects. Tchaikovsky led 3 additional performances as part of the inaugural festival, drawing packed houses every time. His involvement elevated the venue's status in a manner unmatched by any domestic performer. As he left New York on May 21st, the hall stood as a vital pillar of the city's artistic scene from the outset. With every show, the brilliance of Toothill's architecture grew more evident. Artists familiar with European venues proclaimed Carnegie Hall superior in sound quality to nearly all of them. The audio remained rich, yet crisp, distinct without sharpness. Even a lone violin reached the highest seats with flawless clarity. A complete symphony at full volume stayed balanced, never overpowering. The magic resided in subtle features that few listeners ever picked up on directly. The plaster, laid on in several fine coats, formed a subtly uneven texture. This scattered sound waves, diffusing them instead of reflecting them sharply. Walls with a gentle slant avoided unwanted echoes. The vaulted roof spread out reverberations uniformly. Under the floorboards, a space for air-enhanced depth without muddiness. All these components harmonized as Toothill had envisioned, though he couldn't foresee their full synergy. Even more impressive, Toothill achieved this through hands-on trials and keen insights, bypassing the era's limited scientific grasp. Acoustics theory, in 1891, paled beside today's advanced insights. Toothill studied prominent halls abroad, identified successes, eliminated flaws, and devised his unique approach. His technique blended craftsmanship, instinct, and a touch of fortune. What emerged was an ideal that subsequent experts equipped with digital tools and in-depth studies found hard to match. The structure exuded refined grace without excess. Its facade used pale brick accented by Renaissance-inspired window arches. The 57th Street doorway featured a stately 3-level archway, impressive yet understated. Within, the primary auditorium gleamed in soft ivory and gold tones, with 5 steep rows of seats ascending from the pit area. The proscenium framed the platform, and retractable panels could open to extra chairs as required. Carnegie envisioned a space dedicated to artistry, not personal glory. His surname was absent from the outer walls at launch. The modest design was intentional. It functioned as a creative studio for performers, far from a lavish showpiece for benefactors. In the ensuing months after the premiere, the venue set the course that shaped its legacy for years. The New York Symphony Society and Oratorio Society settled in as mainstays, staging shows all season long. Yet it also hosted traveling groups, star virtuosos, intimate combos, and later even mainstream acts. Carnegie intended it for every genre of music, beyond just elite symphonic works. Iconic moments arrived swiftly. That November of 1891, Ignacy John Paderewski took the stage for his U.S. premiere at Carnegie Hall. The Polish virtuoso had dominated Europe, but was obscure stateside. His initial Manhattan concert transformed that overnight. Reports from the time spoke of spectators in tears, surging forward post-finale, clamoring for encores well into the night. Paderewski revisited the hall often across the following 40 years, each visit a highlight. Gustav Mahler directed the New York Philharmonic there, starting in 1909. The Austrian maestro-conductor faced his waning days amid health woes and grief. Still, his concerts in those closing years forged enduring impressions passed down through time. Players who caught him as youngsters recalled it with lasting awe years afterward. Enrico Caruso graced Carnegie Hall with multiple outings from 1904 to 1920. The Italian bel canto legend was his generation's premier operatic tenor, earning riches unmatched by prior vocalists. Venues of any sort beckoned him. He selected Carnegie Hall for Manhattan gigs because its sound let him unleash his full range effortlessly. The space amplified his innate timbre, rather than clashing with it. Sergei Rachmaninoff delivered his U.S. piano debut at Carnegie Hall in November 1909. He played his second piano concerto, the piece that had revived him after emotional collapse. Listeners embraced it warmly, catching the newcomer off guard as he arrived wary of their welcome. Over the subsequent 30 years, he graced the hall more than 40 times, treating it as his base in America. Arturo Toscanini helmed the New York Philharmonic at Carnegie Hall from 1926 to 1936. The renowned Italian conductor was known for his iron-fisted approach during practices, insisting on flawless execution from each performer. Though concert-goers only witnessed the fruits of that relentless drive, his renditions of works by Beethoven, Brahms, and Verdi established benchmarks that later maestros used to gauge their own efforts. Carnegie Hall welcomed all genres of music with the same elegance. Swing and jazz started gaining traction there in the 1930s. Benny Goodman's 1938 show, which included Count Basie and players from the Duke Ellington Orchestra, proved that the venue could host lively jazz just as masterfully as orchestral pieces. That performance signaled jazz's integration into the heart of American popular culture, affirming the sounds of Black America through a showcase in the bastion of European classical heritage. Andrew Carnegie himself showed up often until he passed away in 1919. He kept a personal box seat and seldom skipped shows by performers he held dear. Accounts say he shed tears freely at especially stirring events, showing no hesitation about displaying his feelings openly. The hall stood as his most profound gift to society, outshining even his widespread library initiatives in its influence on the arts. His passing at 83 ushered in a new phase for the landmark he had founded. Carnegie had run it as a partly business-like operation, offsetting expenses with ticket revenue and tolerating small deficits as needed. But his heirs showed little desire to uphold that model. In 1925, the Carnegie kin transferred ownership to Robert E. Simon Sr., a prominent New York property magnate, for $2 million. Simon, an avid supporter of music, fully grasped the treasure he had acquired. He had zero plans to tear it down or make sweeping changes to a structure that already bordered on ideal. During his stewardship, Carnegie Hall operated seamlessly as always. The in-house ensembles stuck to their timetables. Visiting musicians drew packed crowds. The prosperous era launched by Carnegie flowed on without a hitch. The 1920s and 1930s introduced fresh waves of iconic talents. Vladimir Horowitz debuted in the U.S. at Carnegie Hall in January 1928. The 24-year-old Ukrainian pianist was largely obscure stateside. Scheduled at the 11th hour to fill in for a sick colleague, he opted to play a piano concerto, the very piece the composer had led at the Hall's inaugural event 37 years prior. Horowitz delivered with such raw virtuosity and passion that spectators halted the concert with applause right after the opening section. The following day's reviews proclaimed the emergence of a major piano force. Over the ensuing 6 decades, Horowitz graced Carnegie Hall's stage more than 200 times, forging one of the most legendary bonds between artist and venue in music's annals. Arthur Rubinstein offered yearly recitals there from the 1920s into the 1970s. The Polish virtuoso excelled in Chopin, and his readings became the yardstick for everyone else. He cherished the hall's sound quality so much that he demanded rehearsal time there before shows. A rare privilege. The crew would unlock the doors for him at unusual times, letting him perch solo on stage to hear his piano resonate uniquely in that environment. Marian Anderson took the Carnegie Hall stage in 1928, one of the earliest black classical vocalists to do so. She graced it many times over her professional life, with every outing underscoring how true artistry rose above racial divides. Her 1939 appearance there, soon after the Daughters of the American Revolution, denied her at Washington's Constitution Hall, highlighted that certain U.S. venues prized skill above bias. The space evolved with shifting listener preferences while holding on to its core identity. Jazz grew into a staple of the lineup. Duke Ellington and his band played there repeatedly starting in the 1930s. Billie Holiday performed at Carnegie Hall in 1946 and 1948, her singing enveloping the room, with the closeness she evoked in intimate clubs. The same sound design that elevated Beethoven's symphonies amplified the blues. Traditional folk tunes also earned a place. Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, and Lead Belly all took the stage in the 1940s. What began as a symbol of elite European refinement was transforming into a more inclusive space, a platform celebrating every kind of meaningful music. Yet the venue's budget was starting to strain. Robert E. Simon, Sr., died in 1935. His son, Robert E. Simon, Jr., took over the asset, inheriting the challenges of upkeeping a 40-year-old edifice amid Manhattan's escalating property values. Upkeep expenses were hefty and climbing. The structure demanded ongoing care, cracked plaster required fixes, and the heating setup was showing its age. The backstage gear required modernization. Simon Jr. covered these outlays using revenue from leases, though the margins for profit remained slim. As property, Carnegie Hall held immense worth, yet it operated on the edge as a commercial venture. By the start of 1952, the surrounding district had undergone a total metamorphosis. What once felt utterly distant in 1891 had evolved into the pulsing core of Midtown Manhattan. Skyscrapers of commerce loomed on every side of Carnegie Hall. The ground it stood on now commanded an astronomical price. Real estate speculators and builders started pressing Simon with bids to acquire it. The financial logic was straightforward and harsh. After costs, Carnegie Hall brought in roughly $200,000 a year from rentals. Its plot alone was valued in the millions. Erecting a sleek office high-rise, there promised yields that no series of performances could match. For any strictly logical buyer, raising Carnegie Hall appeared entirely reasonable. Simon turned down these proposals well into the early 1950s. He grasped the site's profound cultural significance, regardless of its shaky economics. Yet by 1955, sustaining the structure demanded infusions of serious funding he lacked. Extensive fixes were essential, beyond what daily operations could support. That year, Simon declared Carnegie Hall available for purchase at $5 million. The announcement sent ripples of concern through the musical community, though no swift response emerged. Observers took it for granted that a rescuer would appear. Losing Carnegie Hall seemed unthinkable. Without doubt, some municipal authorities would act, or a deep-pocketed supporter would arise, or some fix would surface. But nobody came forth. Come the beginning of 1956. A business-oriented developer extended a bid that Simon deemed unavoidable. The purchaser planned to level the edifice and raise a contemporary office building in its place. The scheme complied fully with regulations. Carnegie Hall enjoyed no safeguards from municipal or state statutes. It amounted to mere private land, sold off to the top offer. Word of the impending demolition sparked front-page stories and scathing editorials. Still, public anger by itself couldn't preserve the landmark. New York during the 1950s was swept up in so-called urban renewal, an approach that viewed aging edifices as barriers to advancement. Leading this push was Robert Moses, the unofficial yet vastly influential city shaper who had molded New York's growth for 30 years. Moses held that urban centers must undergo perpetual reconstruction to stay competitive economically. Antiquated constructions, however elegant or noteworthy, warranted removal if they impeded updates. He had directed the clearance of entire districts citywide, uprooting countless families to clear space for roads, residential complexes, and business zones. Carnegie Hall fit precisely the profile of what Moses saw as disposable. It was dated. It catered to a niche crowd. It squatted on prime terrain. Its flawless sound design and unique artistic role played no part in his assessments. Advancement demanded concessions. The peril to Carnegie Hall stood out as hardly exceptional. Nationwide, municipalities were toppling heritage sites at a furious clip. Take New York's Penn Station, a Beaux-Arts gem that had functioned as the metropolis's majestic rail hub from 1910 until its 1963 demolition to accommodate today's Madison Square Garden. That demolition would later ignite the drive for safeguarding history. But the realization arrived too tardily to prevent it. Carnegie Hall teetered on a parallel brink. Lacking statutory shields, official aid, or a preserver buyer, its demise loomed inevitable. Demolition teams were lined up. The successor skyscraper was under blueprint. The timer was running. The performers rallied at the outset. Leonard Bernstein, a frequent conductor within its walls, reached out to affluent donors and government figures via calls. He perceived the risks not only in artistic terms but in real-world ones too. The New York Philharmonic staged the bulk of its shows at Carnegie Hall. Its disappearance would leave the ensemble without a venue. Vladimir Horowitz lent his influence as well. The pianist, who had graced its stage more than any other active musician, penned op-eds for the press and addressed all willing ears. Carnegie Hall, he stressed, transcended bricks and mortar. It was an instrument, honed with the same precision and rarity as a Stradivarius violin. Yet the strongest champion turned out to be Isaac Stern. The violinist had graced Carnegie Hall consistently from his 1943 premiere there. He was deeply familiar with the space, its sonic qualities, and aware that no contemporary construction could match what Toothill had wrought via 19th-century artistry and instinct. In early 1960, Stern launched an effort to rescue the hall. At the height of his fame and authority, Stern was just 39 years old. He got in touch with all the performers he knew who had graced Carnegie Hall's stage. He approached orchestra leaders, musical creators, and instructors in the field. He secured backing from the American Federation of Musicians. On various radio shows and TV appearances, he warned that New York risked committing an act of cultural destruction. Stern's plea blended artistic concerns with real-world logic. Spaces with flawless sound quality like that were extremely hard to find. Even with cutting-edge tools, today's designers and experts kept falling short of matching the rich resonance and precision found in those iconic 19th-century venues. Carnegie Hall embodied expertise that had faded over time, along with building skills impossible to recreate. If torn down, it would be lost for good. Stern also tapped into local patriotism. How could New York, viewing itself as America's artistic hub and perhaps the globe's, raise its premier performance space? What impressions would tourists form upon discovering the city had leveled Carnegie Hall for yet another faceless high-rise? Such a choice would leave an indelible mark on the city's standing. Throughout the first half of 1960, the drive picked up steam. Editorials in papers decried the planned teardown. Artists held fundraising performances, directing all earnings toward the preservation push. Signature drives spread far and wide, collecting thousands of names. Yet these efforts sidestepped the core issue. Carnegie Hall belonged to private owners. Absent a committed purchaser or official intervention to safeguard it, popular opinion carried no weight. The turning point arrived when Stern persuaded municipal leaders that New York City ought to acquire the landmark itself. It would shift to public ownership, managed by a charitable organization under city control. This setup promised lasting security alongside expert oversight. Resistance arose right away. In 1960, the city's finances were tight. Everyday needs like education, law enforcement, waste management, and welfare programs were already stretching resources thin. Dropping $5 million on a music venue felt like an unnecessary luxury, especially with so many areas still short on essentials. Robert Moses pushed back hard, contending that public funds shouldn't prop up elite entertainment spots. If the hall couldn't thrive on its own merits, that proved the market deemed it outdated. Propping it up with taxpayer dollars was just emotional thinking dressed up as governance. Fortunately, Stern had powerful backers. With the 1961 election looming, Mayor Robert Wagner saw the value in championing the hall's survival for the good publicity and to showcase cultural commitment. Governor Nelson Rockefeller, a strong arts supporter, signaled he'd back state help if needed. A handful of city councilors and state lawmakers started crafting bills to greenlight the deal. The policy fight dominated the rest of 1960. Stern spoke at committee sessions, highlighting the venue's unmatched sound properties and historical weight. Fellow performers joined him in testimony. Leaders from the Metropolitan Opera, Juilliard School's head, and spokespeople for the city's top music groups all pressed officials to move forward. Pushback emerged from surprising sources. Certain fans of classical music feared that city control might invite meddling in what got programmed. Under municipal rule, might officials nudge organizers toward crowd pleasers instead of highbrow works? Could choices prioritize box office success over creative value? Some even debated if the hall was really one of a kind. Since 1891, sound design techniques had improved dramatically. Maybe a fresh venue could rival or surpass it. Over on the Upper West Side, the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts was taking shape, complete with Philharmonic Hall, tailored for symphony sounds. Why rush when that could soon be ready? Stern countered each concern effectively. City stewardship would be hands-off, with an autonomous nonprofit team handling operations. Regarding the new Philharmonic Hall at Lincoln Center, its audio quality remained a gamble until debut. Betting the fate of Carnegie Hall on an experimental newcomer was reckless. The wrecking ball loomed, though. Simon had to close the transaction. The builder itched to break ground. Each passing month racked up expenses and tangled up the legal side. By fall 1960, urgency built toward a resolution. The pivotal breakthrough hit in April 1960 as the New York State Legislature approved a measure letting the city buy Carnegie Hall. The legislation allocated $5 million to buy the property and created the Carnegie Hall Corporation, a nonprofit organization tasked with overseeing the venue for the city. On May 20, 1960, Governor Rockefeller approved the measure. The structure, which had teetered on the edge of being torn down, was ultimately preserved. Plans for the sale to the real estate developer fell through. Instead, Robert E. Simon, Jr. got his $5 million payout from the city. Demolition teams were sent away. This dramatic turnaround had unfolded over almost 5 years, stretching from the first public notice of the sale to its ultimate settlement. During all that time, Carnegie Hall kept running as usual. Artists took the stage before full crowds, seemingly eager to savor the space for as long as possible. From then on, those shows could go on without end. Isaac Stern took on the role of the inaugural chair for the Carnegie Hall Corporation's board, a post he filled for many years. Guiding the organization, he oversaw renovations that honored the hall's renowned sound quality and kept it open to diverse forms of music. The close call with destruction at Carnegie Hall highlighted a key truth about how Americans viewed their cultural landmarks. There was no nationwide framework to safeguard historic sites. Places of profound artistic value might vanish if owners deemed tearing them down more lucrative than upkeep. The demolition of Pennsylvania Station in 1963 would drive this point home further, paving the way for the establishment of New York City's Landmarks Preservation Commission in 1965. Yet Carnegie Hall demanded urgent care right away. Though spared from the wrecking ball, the building bore the scars of 70 years of heavy activity. Cracks spider-webbed through the plaster. Parts of the stage floor dipped unevenly. The HVAC setup was outdated. Fresh coats of paint were flaking off. The once stunning cream and gold decor that had mesmerized crowds on debut night now seemed worn and lackluster. The Carnegie Hall Corporation confronted a tough challenge. The site called for millions in fixes, yet income from tickets hardly offset day-to-day costs. In contrast to exclusive venues backed by rich donors, this one functioned as a near-public asset, needing to defend its spending to municipal finance overseers and sustain widespread community backing. Isaac Stern excelled at raising funds just as deftly as he had rallied the Save the Hall effort. He reached out to performers, businesses, trusts, and private donors, aware that keeping Carnegie Hall alive meant steady monetary investment. The upgrades rolled out gradually across several years, tackling vital structural fixes up front and postponing aesthetic touches. Among the initial focuses was capturing precisely what gave the hall its legendary acoustics. Experts in sound design were hired by the Carnegie Hall Corporation to analyze Toot Hill's genius through rigorous testing. Their results proved sobering. While they could quantify and detail the sonic traits, the precise reasons behind the blend of substances, dimensions, and building techniques yielding such flawless outcomes eluded full comprehension. The recipe for the plaster stayed something of an enigma. Toot Hill had incorporated lime, sand, and horsehair, but the specific ratios and preparation process seemed forgotten. Today's plaster varied in composition from the 1891 version. For any patching of walls or ceilings, crews not only had to mimic the look, but replicate the sound-reflecting qualities. A daunting endeavor. The subtle textures from layering thin coats and the way artisans spread them fostered even sound spread, avoiding sharp reverberations. Current methods, which sought flawless flatness, would in fact harm the audio performance. The team studying the repairs had to revive 19th-century practices and avoid tinkering with Toot Hill's original design. The subfloor under the seating area needed equally delicate handling. The void below helped amplify the space's natural echo. Modernizing the base could jeopardize the very elements that set the room apart. Repairs employed authentic era materials and approaches, viewing the whole edifice as a cherished relic, worthy of utmost respect. The overhaul advanced at a measured pace through the 1960s and on into the 1970s. The venue stayed active and in use the entire time, with work time to avoid clashing with event schedules. Patrons might catch echoes of construction noise amid softer moments in concerts, yet most tolerated it as essential for safeguarding the landmark they had battled to protect. At the same time, the lineup of events at Carnegie Hall kept adapting. The Beatles played a gig there in February 1964 on their debut U.S. tour. The set ran just under 35 minutes, with most of the tunes drowned out by the shrieks of excited young fans. Those who had fretted over pop music tarnishing the venue's prestige saw their concerns validated. Yet the occurrence also highlighted the structure's adaptability in cultural contexts. Carnegie Hall proved capable of hosting diverse musical genres while retaining its core identity. In the 1960s, folk tunes gained greater visibility. Performers like Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, and Judy Collins took the stage, drawing crowds unaccustomed to symphony performances. The space that debuted with Tchaikovsky now welcomed the entire range of U.S. musical traditions. Spanning classical roots from Europe, native folk styles, modern rock and roll, and ongoing jazz contributions, the hall served as a premier destination. Acts such as the Modern Jazz Quartet, Miles Davis, and Charles Mingus even cut live records on site, recognizing that a Carnegie Hall slot elevated jazz to the status of legitimate fine art, on par with orchestral ensembles. Drew performers globally. As the Soviet Union eased restrictions on international tours amid the cultural defrosting of the 1960s and 1970s, the hall frequently marked their debut in the States. Mstislav Rostropovich delivered cello solos there. Sviatoslav Richter offered piano recitals. David Oistrakh tackled violin concertos. Such events held diplomatic weight surpassing their musical value, symbolizing artistic dialogue amid Cold War tensions. By the mid-1970s, Carnegie Hall had overcome its brush with demolition, securing robust legal safeguards and fresh widespread esteem. Still, the edifice demanded further substantial upgrades. The renovations of the 1960s had fixed foundational flaws but overlooked aesthetic flaws. The inside appeared shabby. Today's patrons sought comforts absent from the 1891 design. Planners opted for the most thorough overhaul since the original build. Launched in 1983, the effort ultimately ran about $50 million, tenfold the amount the city spent acquiring it 2 decades prior. Funding blended municipal budgets, state aid, federal heritage grants, and individual contributions. Isaac Stern spearheaded yet another drive for donations, in his 60s yet passionately devoted to the landmark he once rescued. The initiative sought to revive the primary auditorium's inaugural splendor, all while subtly updating behind-the-scenes zones and visitor areas. Craftsmen peeled back layers of accumulated paint, revealing the initial cream and gold palette. They mended the decorative plaster, adorning the loges and tiers. The platform got a facelift, with aged planks swapped for timber, aligned to historic standards. Precision defined the undertaking. Experts in preservation history, sound engineering, and performers versed in auditory impacts vetted each choice. Upon finding that prior fixes had impaired the venue's resonance, teams dismantled them and reinstated authentic setups. Off-stage zones gained current conveniences. Makeup rooms saw overhauls and enlargements. Heating and cooling advanced. Wiring got boosted for today's illumination and audio tech. Lifts received updates, though none of this altered the hall's vital sonic essence or architectural integrity. The primary portal on 57th Street regained its majestic flair. Metal accents shone after buffing. Stone surfaces sparkled post-cleaning. The portal that once greeted Tchaikovsky, Menuhin, Toscanini, and Horowitz now radiated anew. Upon finishing in 1986, Carnegie Hall mirrored its 1891 self, yet equipped to meet late 20th century demands. The relaunch in December 1986 included a festive show led by Leonard Bernstein on the podium. He had championed the hall since the 1960s wrecking threat. At 68, he came back to honor its revival and endurance. Aired across the country, the show reached countless spectators, letting them value this icon, even if they never stepped inside. Isaac Stern held the Carnegie Hall Corporation's top role until passing in 2001. His guidance finally brought fiscal security to the organization. The refurb boosted community engagement. Attendance rose. Business partnerships ensured steady cash flow. The site, once imperiled by money woes, now earned enough to sustain operations sans perpetual peril. Stern's dedication extended past oversight tasks. He kept gracing the stage often, his strings resonating through the haven he battled to defend. In response to queries about his intense efforts to preserve one particular structure, Isaac Stern is said to have remarked that certain losses are irreversible. Carnegie Hall fell into that irreplaceable category. Artists who graced its stage across those years recognized they were part of a legacy, far surpassing any single show. This was the platform for Vladimir Horowitz's U.S. premiere, Arturo Toscanini's conducting appearances, and Leonard Bernstein's influence on the nation's musical heritage. Each event bore the burden of that storied past, even as it enriched the narrative. Yo-Yo Ma delivered frequent recitals at the hall starting in the 1970s. The cellist described how its superior sound quality enabled delicate expression and finesse impossible in inferior venues. Itzhak Perlman, Joshua Bell, and fellow violin virtuosos routinely included Carnegie Hall in their schedules, viewing it less as a mere stopover and more as an essential pilgrimage. Mainstream artists pursued gigs there for the cachet they offered. Judy Garland delivered a memorable concert in 1961, among her final triumphs prior to her passing in 1969. Frank Sinatra took the stage there on several occasions. Liza Minnelli carried on her mother's tradition on that very platform. The Beatles performed in 1964, their show a whirlwind of frenzy that nonetheless proved rock music's legitimacy in domains once dominated by classical traditions. The 1990s spotlighted Carnegie Hall's enduring significance in U.S. cultural annals. It featured in movies and docu-series. Publications explored its design and the luminaries who had appeared within its walls. Visitors increasingly wove it into their Manhattan plans, drawn not only for live music, but to behold the landmark up close. In 1997, the venue earned the National Medal of Arts, America's premier honor for creative achievement. This distinction celebrated more than the physical site. It honored the enduring organization, the waves of performers it had hosted, and its profound impact on the country's artistic landscape, spanning over a century. As the new millennium dawned, Carnegie Hall stood at the pinnacle of its vitality. The structure was robust and soundproof to perfection, its finances secure, and its status safeguarded by law. The averted razing in 1960 served as a stark lesson in the perils of prioritizing profit over heritage. Stern's advocacy effort established a blueprint for safeguarding myriad other landmarks in the ensuing years. Yet debates lingered over the elusive secret behind William Burnett Toothill's acoustic mastery, so tough for contemporaries to emulate. Philharmonic Hall at Lincoln Center, rechristened Avery Fisher Hall in 1973, and eventually David Geffen Hall, debuted in 1962 amid grand anticipation. Its creators wielded cutting-edge tools and acoustic science light years ahead of 1891's capabilities. Still, critics lambasted the space for its dull, uneven resonance. A series of costly overhauls sought remedies, yielding inconsistent success at best. Many contemporary auditoriums encountered parallel issues. Some managed adequacy without brilliance. Others, built at staggering multi-million-dollar prices, proved such sonic disappointments that they demanded complete rebuilds, intensifying the enigma of Carnegie Hall. What insight did Toothill possess that eluded today's specialists? One explanation centered on the plaster's makeup and layering method. Successive fine coats formed a finish both rigid and breathable, unmatched by current substances. Incorporating horsehair lent it framework and texture. The lime-infused mix behaved unlike today's gypsum variants, yet grasping these elements didn't unlock duplication. The artisanal expertise behind it had mostly vanished. A second hypothesis highlighted the venue's geometry. Toothill crafted a rectangular underscore quote, _1__ form with precise dimensional balances. These stemmed from pre-scientific European precedents, honed through ages of experimentation. Intuitive wisdom handed down among craftsmen. Today's designers frequently veered from such time-tested forms, chasing innovative aesthetics, only to find sound quality compromised. A further idea posited that the hall's excellence arose from serendipitous events. The flooring's particular wood might have held special vibrating traits. Decades of settling could have induced favorable tensions in the structure. Elements beyond Toothill's intent might have converged for phenomenal outcomes. Should this hold true, Carnegie Hall truly defied replication. No budget or know-how could duplicate its precise building circumstances. Regardless of the reason, performers understood, from direct experience, that Carnegie Hall held a unique allure. Aspiring artists described their first appearance there with the same awe that older generations had once shown. Seasoned musicians came back season after season, cherishing the structure like a cherished musical tool. The venue possessed a distinct charm, an essence that went beyond mere dimensions or specs. Entering the new millennium introduced fresh obstacles. Online audio captures and broadcast platforms transformed the way individuals engaged with tunes. Listeners now enjoyed top-tier artists from the comfort of their living rooms. Live show turnout dropped nationwide, with millennials opting for different leisure options. Like other cultural spots, Carnegie Hall needed to prove its worth in a time dominated by convenient tech substitutes. To adapt, the organization broadened its scope past mere live events. Learning initiatives invited pupils to the site for hands-on encounters with artists. Local engagement efforts opened up shows to crowds who rarely ventured out for them. Over time, Carnegie Hall evolved from a simple stage into a key player in musical learning and artistic promotion. Starting in 2003, the facility faced yet another major overhaul. This effort targeted zones overlooked in the 1982 update. Teams refurbished the Stern Auditorium, the primary stage area, renamed that year to commemorate Isaac Stern after he passed away. The pair of compact spaces inside, Zankel Hall and Wild Recital Hall, got upgrades too. Zankel Hall, which debuted in 2003, utilized an area sealed since the 1890s. The initial smaller hall under the grand stage had turned into a cinema in the 1890s, served various roles afterward, and eventually sat vacant. Designers dug down to the substreet layer, forming an adaptable area for intimate ensembles, modern pieces, and innovative shows. This addition Let Carnegie Hall offer diverse musical styles, all while safeguarding the chief space for classic orchestral and individual recitals. The safeguards put in place post-1960 emergency were crucial, especially as property prices in central Manhattan soared to sky-high figures. The ground under Carnegie Hall ranked among the planet's priciest real estate. A builder acquiring it now might erect a skyscraper worth billions in profits, yet preservation rules blocked any teardown. The battle Isaac Stern once waged now carried legal weight. By 2015, Carnegie Hall unveiled a full-scale renewal and upgrade plan budgeted at over $230 million. It aimed to fix outdated systems too worn for fixes, modernize entry points to current codes, and better the behind-scenes areas for artists. Phased across more than 10 years, the initiative kept the doors open the whole time. Achieving balance, a hallmark of past fixes, stayed vital. Current safety regs called for revamps in fire controls, wiring setups, and ease of access features. Yet each tweak underwent scrutiny for its effect on sound quality. The crew handled the prime chamber like a delicate artifact, prone to lasting harm from hasty changes. The stucco walls stayed a perpetual worry. Minor fissures cropped up often, needing fixes with age-old methods and supplies. Sourcing experts in 19th-century plastering grew tougher as such expertise faded from building crafts. Carnegie Hall nurtured ties with niche repair outfits, skilled in old-school elements. Amid all the fixes and growth, the hall's sound excellence stayed its signature trait. Artists continued calling gigs there profoundly rewarding. A keyboardist might deliver the gentlest whisper, sure it would carry to the farthest seats. A full ensemble could swell to roaring peaks without the tone turning blurry or grating. Lone singers projected through the room, unaided. The design still functioned precisely as William Burnett Tuthill envisioned it 130 years prior. Compared to newer spaces, the difference stood out sharply. In 2015, Manhattan's fresh Whitney Museum of American Art launched, boasting an assembly room crafted by famed designers via advanced sound simulation tools. It performed adequately, but nothing remarkable. That year, Hamburg's Elbphilharmonie Concert Hall finally premiered, following prolonged building hiccups and costs nearing $1 billion. Critics split on its sound, with some players lauding it and others deeming it flawed. Carnegie Hall, constructed at a cost of $1.1 million back in 1891, kept surpassing much pricier modern auditoriums, even those inflated by hundreds of multiples in today's dollars. The takeaway was evident. Achieving flawless acoustics went further than just advanced tools or endless funding. It called for skilled craftsmanship, meticulous care, and maybe a touch of serendipity that no amount of planning could force. Beyond its musical legacy, the venue embodied the vital role of safeguarding history, demonstrating how aging edifices could stay energetic and pertinent. The close call with destruction in 1960, along with the triumphant public effort to save it, sparked the nation's push for historic conservation. That momentum led straight to the founding of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission in 1965, spurred by the demolition of Pennsylvania Station and the threat to Carnegie Hall. Now countless structures nationwide benefit from legal safeguards, thanks to advocates who emulated Isaac Stern's approach. Neighborhoods that once shrugged at teardowns now rally to protect their architectural treasures. The financial rationales that almost felled Carnegie Hall hold far less sway in a society that prizes legacy as much as gain. Each year, the hall presents over 250 events spanning everything from orchestral masterpieces to intimate jazz groups and global folk troupes, capturing the breadth of today's sounds while upholding the excellence that marked its start in 1891. Aspiring performers still yearn for their first appearance there, and seasoned virtuosos regard shows as pinnacle moments. Over 3 centuries, the site has mirrored the nation's story. It debuted in an age of wondrous electric illumination and horse-clopping traffic. It weathered global conflicts, economic collapse, and waves of citywide turmoil. It escaped oblivion at a time when relics were seen as barriers to advancement. Rescued by artists and everyday people who grasped that certain losses are permanent, it persists. At the corner of 57th Street and 7th Avenue today, Carnegie Hall retains its 1891 facade. The buff-colored brick skin, the graceful Renaissance portals, and the stately portal that once greeted Tchaikovsky, Horowitz, and Bernstein. Within, the ivory and gold hall accommodates 2,804 patrons, matching Toot Hill's original blueprint almost precisely. The platform where icons took the spotlight stays essentially the same. The very plaster Toot Hill blended and spread clings to the surfaces overhead, scattering audio with the same impeccable clarity from 130 years past. Its longevity stems not just from dodging the wrecking ball, but from fulfilling its founding mission with unwavering quality. Carnegie Hall isn't some relic on display. It's an active space where top-tier talents opt to play. The sound design holds its flawless edge. The renown shines as brightly as ever. Performances echo endlessly. What started as Andrew Carnegie's generous dream endured threats of ruin via grassroots campaigns and thrives under ongoing vigilant care, offering proof of how urban spaces flourish when artistry shares the stage with business. Dismissed by doubters as too remote from the action, it evolved into music's beating heart. Eyed by builders for lucrative teardown, it's now shielded by law as unparalleled. Carnegie Hall's endurance shows conservation works when people choose irreplaceable gems over mere cash. The entrances swing wide, the fixtures glow. Artists stride to the boards and infuse the air with melody, and woven into the plaster, beams, and planks, William Burnett Toot Hill's sonic wizardry keeps its quiet magic alive, outdoing today's gadgets, ensuring Carnegie Hall remains what it always was. America's premier concert space, and quite likely the world's.